Take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
I wanted to talk about Ken Klippenstein getting a visit from the FBI. This is a journalist. For anybody who doesn't know who Ken Klippenstein is, he's an active journalist. He's an independent journalist at this point. For a while, he was working for the Intercept, and then they parted ways. I don't know if he got fired or he decided to quit. I don't think that was ever publicized. But he's actually become more relevant as a journalist ever since leaving the Intercept. He was already pretty relevant before, but maybe in sort of a niche way, where it was a lot of state reporting on, the inner machinations of the state, of the intelligence community and the military industrial complex. That was the sort of beat that he was on, the stuff that he liked reporting on, government leaks, Freedom of Information Act requests, stuff like that. That was kind of his forte. And he's been like a shit poster on Twitter for a long time. There was a point where he got the attention of, I can't remember if it was Ted Cruz or somebody, some elected official, by mocking them. And, he's done various little stunts on Twitter that have gotten some attention on him. So he's overall maybe not the most serious figure, but he is quite a good journalist, and he's quite a serious journalist. And he's only been becoming more and more relevant. So a few months back, he got his hands on the Luigi Mangione manifesto, which there was some confusion about at the time. There was people posting fake ones. Ken wasn't sure if the one he got was real, so he held it back for a little bit until he verified it, and then he posted it. So there was some confusion about what the real one was, but the one he posted was the real one, the one that was obtained from Luigi Mangione at the scene. And more recently than that, I believe it was more recently than that. Maybe I have my timeline mixed up on that. But there was a dossier on J.D. Vance that got released. I believe it was sourced from Iran, sort of a, Oppo research project on J.D. Vance. And that got leaked to Ken Klippenstein as well. And the rest of the U.S. media did not want to report on that. So using the same Hunter Biden logic, they decided that whatever, I don't know, these are hacked materials, or because of the source of the information, we are not going to report on this, so as not to help the political ends of the person leaking this information. And that obviously creates an opportunity for an independent journalist like Ken Klippenstein to get that scoop and get all the credit for publicizing that story. Now, that also led to a visit from the FBI when he published that J.D. Vance dossier, because, again, this is from Iran, and they wanted to study whether he has some kind of connection there, or whether he had some sort of motive to help a foreign enemy of some kind by publishing that dossier. He was also banned off Twitter for a short time by Elon Musk because of that, which raised some interesting questions about hypocrisy, considering how much noise Elon Musk has made about the Hunter Biden original laptop story being censored on Twitter. And then he essentially did the same thing to Ken Klippenstein for even less cause, if you ask me. So that ban was then reversed. And, everything went on as normal. And despite the fact that Ken has been interfered with multiple times by the FBI or the state in various ways, it always just seems to help him as a journalist. And that's kind of how this sort of thing works. You try to suppress a certain message, you try to suppress the message of a particular person, and that might just end up making their message even stronger. And so what Ken is now in trouble for is publishing the dossier of the shooter who killed two staffers at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. So this was a guy who seemed to be committing this murder in the name of Palestine as a way to get people's attention around the issue. And that is what is in the manifesto. It's a detailed manifesto about essentially America and the world at large losing the ability, losing the humanity to recognize what's going on with the genocide in Gaza, and how that has made this person feel that he has no choice but to do something drastic like what he did. So the FBI basically wanted to interview Ken about this because they didn't know how he got the dossier. He was the first person with it. He published it before anybody else had it. And they wanted to know how he got it, why he published it. Same questions as before, except this time they seem to have much less information about who he is and how he got this dossier. Obviously, they have some things about him on file, but one of the notable things that he said about this visit from the FBI was that it was more aggressive this time. So the times they've come to see him in the past, it was more friendly, and I've heard of that. I've heard of the Secret Service going to talk to people who maybe post something online that gets their attention or something, but they don't really take it as a serious threat. But as a matter of course, they go and they talk to you and they try to figure out what's going on in your head, what your life looks like. I think their main goal with that is to be polite and friendly enough that you let them in your house so they can see what your house looks like, get a sense for what type of person you are, as well as how you react to being lightly questioned. You know, when two guys who say they're the FBI or the Secret Service show up at your door, how do you react to that? And I do think that there's a tactic where they do it in the least confrontational way possible because they want to disarm that sort of instinctual reaction that you might have if men in black suits with black sunglasses come to your door and say that they're the Secret Service or whatever. Most people are going to have a nervous reaction to that. And so there seems to have been an approach over the last several years to be, at least in the cases where they don't feel like there's some kind of imminent threat, to be a little bit more friendly and casual in their approach. That is what Ken has said that he experienced in the past. He said that this was not like that they were more aggressive in their asking him of questions and aggressive in demanding to know how he had this, and also trying to get him to answer their questions, which he didn't do. He turned them away, said that they would have to talk to his lawyer, which they did, and that's the right way to handle this situation, by the way. I know I talked about Hassan Piker not that long ago. He got detained by Customs and Border Enforcement, and you know, they were questioning him, and he was talking about the questions that they asked and the answers that he gave, and you know, nobody should be interacting if they get detained, whether it's border agents or the FBI or ICE or something like that. Don't answer any of their questions. Just don't. And I understand that it is scary because these people, in some cases, don't seem to be operating under any pretense of constitutional rights that you have. They seem to have been given the orders to violate those constitutional rights, and that it'll be sorted out later, and that it's not their problem, essentially, if somebody's rights get violated. So, you know, it's dicey. Is somebody like that going to respect the fact that you have a right not to answer their questions? You know, that starts to make it feel a lot more likely that they're just going to lock you up because you refuse to comply. But still, you shouldn't talk to the police in general, as a general rule, especially under these type of conditions where they're trying to round up anybody they can, and they are trying to create the pretense of some kind of terrorist affiliation with people when it doesn't exist. You know, you just shouldn't give them anything. You shouldn't give them any information, and you shouldn't entertain them. So that is what Ken did this time around. I don't think that that's how it went last time. Maybe he's just in the habit of turning them away. I don't know. But it's possible that because they were more aggressive this time, he saw that as a reason to not engage with them. But either way, I mean, he's a smart guy, so I think he probably just knew that this was best to not give them what they were looking for. So they left, and then after a back and forth with his lawyer, they ended up sending the text version of what their questions were for him, along with a note that said, please don't share this with anybody except your client, to his lawyer, meaning we don't want anybody except Ken to see this. And then Ken posted that on his Substack. So those questions, you know, are available for anybody who wants to see them. He did not say much about what it meant that they were more aggressive this time. I kind of wish that he illustrated what exactly that looked like. But he just said that, that the tone was different this time. And based on the questions they were asking, it seems to me that there's a little bit of panic there. I mean, maybe just because of the way the questions are listed, it makes it sound like, they're asking all these questions in sort of a hurried tone. But I mean, it sounds to me that they have no idea how he got his hands on this manifesto. And because it is attached to what they view as Hamas terrorism or whatever, they view that as a possible connection between Ken Klippenstein and whatever terrorist organizations. So that's, I think, the main thing to highlight here is that the Mossad theory of what is and isn't Hamas propaganda and how quote-unquote Hamas propaganda works has full seizure of the American government. And so we're going to continue to see that logic applied across the board, which is that, support for Palestine in general is automatically support for Hamas, or it is perpetuated through some kind of like Hamas-sponsored channels. And so I think that is the reason that they tried to clamp down on Ken here, and they wanted to scare him. They wanted to scare him off of publishing this sort of thing and whatever, connections and channels that he might have that allowed him to get his hands on this manifesto. They want to try to disincentivize that and make him afraid to do that. And look, I mean, it's not out of the question that they would come after him more forcefully because of this. I think the way he handled it, he probably backed them off, and I doubt that there will be that much more that comes of it, but there definitely could. And so he mentioned that they're probably going to say he's impeding the investigation and he's giving away the sources and methods of the FBI, and essentially that they might keep coming after him because of this. And they certainly might. He has also highlighted that he has covered the FBI for a long time, and this is not an omnipotent group, and they're actually quite incompetent, and that's true. And I think the main story of American intelligence, at least in terms of the pop culture understanding, being the FBI and the CIA, is that these are two groups that are constantly getting in each other's way. And the FBI kind of has a reputation for being pretty incompetent and definitely stepping on the toes of the CIA. So one criticism that I have of Ken Klippenstein that is relevant to this is that he has essentially takes kind of a blasé stance when it comes to the corruption of Trump and Trump's cronies. Not to say that he is approving of it or not critical of those forms of corruption, but he speaks about it as though it's not necessarily novel. It's not something unlike what we've seen. And in my experience, he kind of pushes back on the idea that Trump represents some kind of unique form of corruption or evil in American politics. He was critical of the Russiagate story. And one thing that he has been talking about lately related to Pete Hegseth is, I think, surrounding, Pete Hegseth being drunk and the whole Signal scandal and all that. He came out and made a video on YouTube not too long ago saying that, yes, Hegseth is bad and it's not good to have a drunk in the driver's seat of the military or in any of these positions. However, the people that we had in that position before, you could make the argument that they're worse. Now, I'm not saying that he's making that argument. I don't think he is. And that's kind of my issue with it, is that it's like, if you're going to make that argument that we're better off with Pete Hegseth in the driver's seat than we were with Lloyd Austin and Biden's people, then fine, make that argument. But I don't really respect this kind of like throwing your hands up and saying, well, of course Pete Hegseth is bad, and I'm going to report on that. And he does report on these things in a pretty fair way, a balanced way, I would say. He does just seem focused on corruption in general. But I think this over skepticism of narratives that come from mainstream media, which it's fair to be skeptical of. But if it causes you to throw out the part of your brain that tells you that Trump and the corruption of Trump, the method of corruption of Trump, represents a unique threat to the rights of Americans, I think that that's a mistake, and I think that that's overly cynical. And while you can point to the mainstream media and the narratives about Trump and the methods of the mainstream media and say that you have lost credibility because of these methods, and that's why people don't believe you, that's why Trump has become more powerful, I think that there is some validity to that critique. But I also think that we can just be realistic with ourselves and realize that, yes, the people who were in charge before were psychopaths, and especially when it comes to the military, pretty much everybody who's ever been in charge has been some kind of psychopath. But they knew how to run the ship. And I don't necessarily know that you could make the argument that we are better off with somebody who is a psychopath and also doesn't know how to run the ship. Maybe the incompetence would get in the way of a person like that doing as much damage as they could possibly do. And you could extrapolate that to the other departments, right? The FBI, which is run by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. These are a couple fucking jerk-offs, you know what I mean? So maybe their incompetence will get in the way of them clamping down on the rights of Americans. We know that they are going to make attempt to clamp down on the rights of Americans. That's what they want to do, and they're going to do their best at it. So the question here is the power structure of the government changing under Trump the way it is that going to have a material effect on the way the government and its agents interact with Americans and their rights, including Ken Klippenstein? So the fact that they were more aggressive this time around, it could be an indication of many different things. He mentions in his article that this says that the Trump administration is now giving the directive from the top down that people can be more aggressive in pursuing this stuff in the field and that they don't have to use a light touch. And okay, so that's one step, but maybe we can take that a few steps further and say the fact that you are feeling a difference in the way these people are talking to you is because many dominoes have fallen in the hierarchy, you could say, or the power structure of a place like the FBI that is causing them to be more aggressive with you and maybe even to be less in the loop than they were before, which puts you potentially in a riskier position. Because if the FBI before, let's say hypothetically, they were in a position where they understood Ken Klippenstein's sources and methods better because they were more competent and they had more long-term, operatives in place that let them know how some of these channels of information works in a reliable way. This new FBI gets rid of all of that in classic Trump fashion. They get rid of the established methods because they want to redo everything from scratch. And in the case of the FBI, that leads to them knowing less, which actually puts Ken Klippenstein in a more vulnerable position. Because if they are more skeptical of where he's getting this information and they feel panicked because they don't have access to that, then that might go a few steps toward putting him on the kind of list that he really doesn't want to be on at the moment. And it's just speculation, because I think the other flip side to that argument is that the FBI and other intelligence agencies having better documentation, better sources, better methods and ways and means is actually more dangerous for a journalist like him because they're being more effective at keeping an eye on him. But I think I would argue the opposite, that these guys think they know what they're doing. They've thrown out all the rule books. They don't care about your rights or anybody's rights. And if they feel like you're getting one over on them or you know something they don't know, that is going to cause them to treat you like an enemy. And I'm not saying that, Ken should be afraid of them. I don't think anybody should be afraid of them. But I think we should be realistic about the fact that the incompetence and the loyalty above all else that characterizes these guys' politics and leadership style, like, it's definitely going to lead to them being more aggressive in trying to clamp down on and damage the rights of the average American. I think the difference in tone that Ken experienced here, despite the fact that what he did here was not really different from what he's done in the past, journalism-wise, is an indication that the incompetence is in fact there, but also that incompetence, the worsening of that incompetence, makes for a more volatile and more dangerous situation for a journalist like him. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews, also music. If you like the music that plays in the back of these podcasts, all that's going to be posted there, as well as my EPs. I just dropped a new EP called Dead Internet Theory, which is now available on all platforms, but it was available first for members only. So if you want early access to future music and projects like that, become a member. And if there's other stuff that you would like to see as members only content, let me know and we'll figure some things out.